Michael Kirby, it's a pleasure to have you on the program.
Good to be here.
The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, has said that it is urgent that there is protection of religious freedom, and he is going to act on this. Is that something you would agree with him on, that this is needed?
I don't think that there is any great default in our protections for religious freedom in Australia, and I think Australians have a healthy view about the importance of people having their faith and being able to observe it. I have a similar view myself. Having been raised as a Sydney Anglican, I'm not all that different from the Baptists, and Prime Minister sends his daughters to a Baptist school, so I know where he's coming from. But
I suppose the sense, if I could just come in there, the sense is that particularly given the vote on marriage equality last year, that there was a sense that these freedoms were being eroded or under attack, or people were being isolated because of their religious view. Do you see an erosion of the protections of religious freedom?
Not really. You know, Lionel Murphy often said to me when we talked about the Constitution that our Constitution in section 116 gives protection for freedom of religion, but it also gives protection for freedom from religion. And it's important to understand that one of the greatest gifts of British constitutionalism to Australia was the principle of secularism in the public space. And I don't think the problem in Australia in recent years has been so much protection of religious freedom as protection for the people who don't have a religion or who ask that religion doesn't butt into their ordinary citizenship. And that's the problem.
That's difficult, isn't it? Deciding where that tension lies and how to navigate that tension. I want to come to that, but you did raise section 116, which is the freedom for religion, to join a religion, to practice a religion. But there are many jurists who are critical of that and say that it does not go far enough, or is not adequately protecting people. It applies to federal law, but not to state laws that may impinge on religious freedom, for an example. I mean, you sat on the High Court, you would know this better than I, but do they have a point that section 116 is not adequate protection enough?
Well, it certainly isn't a very good protection, because it's been interpreted by the justices of the High Court over the course of the century to be very weak. For example, it says that there will not be an established religion in this country, and that's been interpreted as meaning only that you don't have a religion like the Church of England is in England under their constitutional arrangements. But those expressions in our Constitution were given a much wider interpretation in the United States, and they give a much greater protection against religion and for intrusion of religion. Whereas here in Australia, in the last 10 years even, we've seen huge amounts of money devoted, public money, taxpayers' money, given by taxpayers who are not religious or are anti-religious, being devoted to the propagation of religious views and to the protection of religious institutions. So I think if section 116 isn't strong enough, then it certainly isn't necessarily strong enough for protecting secularism, and that's what I'm on about, secularism in the public space.
And that's where I want to come in, because that's where the tension arises here. If we take the same-sex marriage vote, as it's sort of colloquially known, from last year, and we look at the impact that has had, or people perceive it to have had, on religious freedom, is there a tension there between someone who may hold a religious view that they cannot accept same-sex marriage, or marriage equality, and being silenced in expressing that view, or placed in positions where they have to compromise that view?
Well, if what they want is, from their understanding of Scripture, which is not a universal understanding, I mean, it's the same as the provisions of our Constitution or provisions of law, you get different points of view. But if they want to be nasty and go on being nasty to LGBTIQ people, gay people, then they have to be told that there are limits to the extent that they do that. When I was growing up, in Australia, it was okay to be gay so long as you kept very, very quiet about it, so long as you told nobody, not even the people you love most, your parents and your siblings. And that was the price you paid for being let alone. And if that's what people of faith want, then I'm afraid they're going to have to be told that that is not available. That is not now on offer. It is unscientific and it has to stop.
You use the word nasty. I suppose it comes down then to the definition of whether someone is acting in a way that is nasty or whether they are acting in good conscience. The one that is always used, and perhaps it's flippant, but the idea of the baker who would not bake a cake for a gay couple. In that instance, is that someone saying, I don't wish to offend you, but in good conscience, I can't do this? Or is that nasty in your view and something that should be outlawed?
Well, if a baker is in the public space and is selling the products and all the lovely cakes and all the things we shouldn't eat are on display, then if you then have somebody comes in and says, well, now we'd like to have this cake for John and Joe, and he says, no, I'm not going to do that, or I don't agree with that, then he's really there in the public space selling his goods and services. And once you allow people to say, I don't agree with that, don't forget a lot of racial discrimination was based on the Bible. Hatred of people who are left-handed, they can find something in the Bible to support that. And I'm old enough to remember the time when in the southern states of the United States, white people got on the bus and shifted the marker, and black people, old black ladies, had to stand up and stand whilst a white boy sat down. And this is the claim to religious freedom that goes too far. And okay, it's sometimes difficult to determine where you go and where you stop. But I think we've really gone too far in Australia in pandering to religious susceptibilities and claims that they are not having respect. If respect is going back to the old days, I don't think that's on, and it's unscientific and it shouldn't be successful.
Do you suspect or are you concerned that the Prime Minister may lean too far the other way, that he may indeed lean towards enshrining religious freedom above and beyond the concerns that you have? Does that concern arise from, you raised this, from his own religious faith, his own Pentecostal religious practice?
I'm sure that the Prime Minister is a good man and he has good belief, and I've welcomed his statement that he believed that we should love one another, and he loves all Australians. And he, in fact, in fairness to him, said he loves people of all sexualities. So, and some of these things, I know how it is, might have been put into his mouth by journalists trying, I know you don't agree to this and you don't do it, but it does happen.
You have posed the question, if he loves all Australians, does he love gay Australians as well?
Well, it is a question because, you see, even in his term, this a short time that he's been in office, a huge amount, $4.2 billion have been found for private and religious schools. And the public schools, which is where I was educated, have really suffered by comparison. And the Gonski dividend, which we all hoped was going to make sure that provision of federal and state monies to school education would be basically going back to the needs of those schools. And instead of that, a huge amount has been found. This is on top of the very great amount that was found for the chaplaincy scheme. And the public schools, which educate 2/3 of Australians, are not receiving enough education. Mr. Morrison was educated at Sydney Boys High School. Mr. Howard was educated at Canterbury Boys High School. I was educated at Fort Street Boys High School. But I'm speaking up for the public schools and for the secular space and for secularism, and we're losing that, and I don't think it's a good step.
Is it a defence of secularism, and the Prime Minister has raised this as well, to say that we should not celebrate Christmas demonstrably? He says, look, that is part of our tradition as a nation. The majority of people in Australia who claim a religious belief are Christians. Should secularism impede the celebration of things like Christmas in the public space?
I think some element of reflecting religious views, but you see, once you start in a multicultural, multi-faith society like Australia to celebrate the views of Christianity and my tradition, then you've got to provide a space for the Islamic faith, for the Jewish faith, and for Chinese people who don't have any of these above, and they really are puzzled by introducing these issues into public education and public dialogue generally. So it has a price, and it can't just be Christianity. I didn't remember that we had big celebrations of Christmas at school. It may have been mentioned, but school was there for everybody. Public schools are there for everybody, not just Christians.
We all enjoyed the Christmas holiday, I can recall.
That's right.
Can I just finish with a reflection for you on when you would like to see the Ruddock report released? Would you like to see released now and a response to this fast track?
Well, I think it should be released, and the way in which the government comes to a conclusion on it should not depend all those enthusiasts who wrote very large numbers of faith societies put their point of view. It should be put back into the general dialogue of Australian citizens, as it will have to be in Parliament, and that will make sure, I think, that the basic Australian fair go, which is the fair go of allowing people to have their faith, but not allowing it to be pressed upon them too far. I think that is something that is very deep in Australian values, and I believe we will re-find it, because essentially it's one of the great gifts that the British gave us. A state is secular. It's there for everybody, not just for Christians, not just for people of religious belief.
Michael Kirby, it's always a pleasure to have you on the program, sir. Thank you again.
It's a pleasure.